There's a yes and no boxes. No?
Something else.
Okay.
You're already like,
We're live? Very good. Okay. Tonight's message is called What is the Time? What is the time? That's the title tonight, LP, okay? What? Oh, that's not right. What is the time? All right. That's what I think. One of the things I like about the Spanish language is they put the question marks and the stuff on
both sides.
On both sides. Yeah, I like that. Let's let's read a little bit from chapter 4 of Esther, and that'll get us started for tonight. We'll review a little bit some things that are important. Okay. All right, let's start with chapter 4, verse number 7. Let's start with verse number 6. We'll start with chapter 4, verse number 6. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain to her that he might command her to go into the king and to make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. So Hathach returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. And then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's province know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court of the king, to the king who has not been called, he has but one law, put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. And so they told Mordecai Esther's words. Let's go ahead and pray just a moment. Father, thank you for the real life drama of Mordecai and Esther and King Xerxes. Thank you, Lord, that you touch Xerxes' parents, his father and his mother's father, Lord, and you prepared this man to be able to be your tool, but you had to work with him. And you had to have a special woman like Esther and a special man like Mordecai to get the job done. We're thankful you did. And we're thankful that you brought a great salvation through them, through Esther, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Bless us tonight as we read, as we think, as we pray, as we teach. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, the first thing we want to look at is just a timeline on Xerxes. And by timeline, I mean his different dates. He was born in 519. Here we go. He was born in 519. He came to the throne about 485, I believe. So he came to the throne. His father had been Darius. His mother was actually the daughter of Cyrus. So he had a couple of kings that were before him, and they were actually people that God used in special ways. If you remember King Darius, what other Old Testament prophet was King Darius connected to in Babylon? In Babylon. That's the clue. Daniel. Yeah. Yeah. Well, he was after Nebuchadnezzar's either son or grandson fell. Then first it was King Darius. And so he was with Daniel in the lion's den. And then King Cyrus is very interesting because he came on the scene and he is called in Isaiah 45 God's anointed or God's Messiah. So it's interesting. And those are the forebears of Xerxes. So in 485, Xerxes starts with the throne. 482 is the big party of chapter 1. So that's the chapter 1 big party. And we were suggesting that it probably was a political party as much as anything to get them ready, because in 480, he would invade Greece. and try and take Greece. And he won some campaigns, he won some battles, but then they were defeated. And so then he comes back in 478. You have the things that happen in chapter 2. And in chapter 2, let's look just for a moment. In chapter 2, the things that are happening at the very beginning of chapter 2, and this is 478. And what's happening there? After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus, King Xerxes, decided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done and what had been decreed. And then the servant said, what?
Then the king's personal attendants proposed, let a search be made for a beautiful young virgin for the king.
Right, a new queen.
Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of this realm to bring all these beautiful girls into the harem at the citadel of Susa.
Good, good, good. So at this point, how old is Xerxes? It's 478. He's born in 519. So he is 40 or 41 or something like that.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
Over 40.
Okay. And then the next date that we need to add in here that especially plays into our story. So sometime in 478, you have the search and Esther becomes the queen. And then the next date that we have in the book is 473. And then what's going to happen 5 years later after Esther has become queen? Who's going to arise on the setting? Last week we talked about a hearing, a snake, and a cry. So who would be the one? Who would be the one that comes on the scene at 473?
What's his name? The bad guy.
Right. Haman rises up.
Haman.
So Haman rises up, and he has come to power, and so he wants to have a purge of the Jewish people. So these are the dates on Xerxes, and I wanted to mention the dates and look at them because I think hopefully by the time we get done with tonight's lesson, there'll be some significance to them, especially this 5-year period. And the interesting thing is that Xerxes only was king till 65 or 65. So we don't know what happened to Esther. We don't know if they had any children. We don't know any of those things. But we do know that
do we know who the king was after him?
Yeah, I think it was one of his brothers. He's called Artaxerxes, and I don't have that written down. I'll look through my notes on that. But I think it was either a son or a brother that killed him, and then they took the throne from him. But let's go back to chapter 4, and we're reading in chapter 4. And so we read a little bit, and Haman has put out his. He got together with the king. He basically told the king, there are these really bad people that shouldn't be in your kingdom. We need to get rid of them. I'll pay you tons and tons of money to make sure it gets done. And then you'll have tons and tons of money in the treasury and everything will be wonderful. And the king goes, okay, go ahead and do that. And then Mordecai finds out about it. Mordecai's out in the streets and he's in sackcloth and ashes and he's crying out loudly. And Esther tries to get him to take some clothes and to stop doing that. And would he follow Esther's lead on that? Okay, he would not, would he? He would not. That's verse number, let's see, verse number 4. Then Esther's maids and the eunuchs came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed about Mordecai and what his behavior was. I'm not sure at this point she knows about the purge that's going to go on, about the annihilation and the genocide of the Jewish people. I don't think she knows about it at this point. And then in the middle part of verse 4, it says, then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and to take his sackcloth away. But what? But he would not accept it. And so Esther called Hathach and said, go see him, find out what's happening. Mordecai tells him everything. At the end of verse number 8, we were in verse number 9. What does Mordecai say to Esther to do? What should she do? What does he say?
In verse 8, he also gave him a copy of the text of the edict of the annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain to her He told him to urge her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people.
Okay, so Mordecai wants Esther to do what? To go to the king and do what?
Plead.
And plead. Okay, do something. You've got a connection to the king. Do something about it. And then what does she say in verse number 10?
And she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that he be put to death. The only exception to this is for the king to extend the golden scepter to him and spare his life. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king.
Okay, so she basically says what to Mordecai's command?
Like, I don't think so.
If the king doesn't call me, I can't go in there. And if I do go in there, I may not survive. And one of the things that's kind of curious, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, is at the end of verse number 11, it says, yet I myself have not been called in 30 days. What's going on there? What's going on? Why, if he was so in love with her, in chapter 2, he chooses her, everything seems good, and then all of a sudden, 30 days, she hasn't been called in to see him. What's going on? What's going on? Think about it. Put that in your. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Mordecai then told them to answer Esther this, verse number 13. Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And so that's part of what our title is. What is the time? And so what does Mordecai basically say to her in verses 13 and 14?
Like, basically, you probably have been put in this position to save us.
Yes. And God is going to bring about a deliverance. God is going to bring about a relief and deliverance. But you have been placed in a very special position. And she being one that he raised, even though she had told him that if she goes into the king, she may not survive it, then what is her response in verse number 15? What's that, Freddie? Go ahead. What?
Go and gather together all the Jews of Suda and fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, nights or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then go, and though it's against the law, I will go in and see the king. If I must die, I must die.
Okay, so she says, okay, I hear what you're saying. I think she's saying, I trust you. She says, get together, everybody, fast. Probably prayer is connected in this setting too. And in 3 days, I'll go to the king. And if things work out, they work out. And if they don't, they don't. Because I think what Mordecai had said to her, that probably spoke to her, was, you may survive in the beginning of this purge, of this genocide, but it's going to get to you at some point. You're still a Jew. Yeah. And when that comes to be found out, because the dilemma here is that the stronger that Haman gets, if this purge starts and it starts to be the bloodletting, he's just going to get stronger and stronger. In fact, there's even the possibility, you would think, that if some of the other princes of Medo-Persia got big time caught up into it, they might even try to make Haman the king and get rid of the other king, because Xerxes has a Jewish wife. Xerxes has this Jewish woman. What are you doing with the Jewish woman? Because once the purge, once the genocide starts, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Okay. So Mordecai went his way, verse number 17 of chapter 4, and did according to all that Esther commanded him. And now it happened in verse number 5. So the third day. So here's the episode. Here is one of the major dramatic points of this book. She's had her 3 days. She's prayed. The people have prayed. What's going to happen? So she goes to the court. Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes, and she stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in his royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it's like you had an outer court, but if you came into the inner court, which she did, and you weren't called, the law was you could be put to death. And part of that was to protect the king. So the king had perfect privacy. The king had perfect safety. Anybody that comes in, she comes in, he looks up. So it was, verse number 2. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that what? She found. She found what?
He was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand.
Good. She found favor again. It's that idea that she found favor. Remember, she found favor from Haggai, the one who was looking over all the virgins, and that was in chapter 2. In fact, one of the great verses in chapter 2 that tells us a lot about who Esther was. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, let's see.
Chapter 2.
Yeah, chapter 2.
Haggai.
Oh, I'm not finding it.
Verse 8, you're saying, where she was put under the care of Haggai?
Yeah, verse 8, where she's under Haggai. And so the young woman pleased her and she gained his favor. And then she got
verse 14, under the care of somebody.
Yeah. Sha'askaz kept them in line. Okay, so then turn came. Oh, here we go. Verse number 15b, the second part of verse number 15. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. What do you got on the, you got the New International there? What does it say?
Verse 15.
Yeah.
When the turn came for Esther, the girl Mordecai had adopted a daughter of the uncle Abihail to go to the king. She asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the harem, suggested, and Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. Right. And so this is one of the points of the book, is that she has received favor. She receives favor from Haggai. She receives favor now from everyone. When she goes in and the king is with her and spends time with her, loved her. The New King James says in verse number 17, she obtained favor and grace from him. Again, now she has been the queen 5 years, from 478 to 473. For some odd reason, to me it's an odd reason at this point, for 30 days she hasn't seen the king. And what is that? And so let's think about that. Don't try and answer it quite yet. When we're ready, we're going to try and answer it. And so now it happens on the third day that Esther goes in, the king sees her, and again, what does the king do for Esther? He does the golden scepter and says, it's fine that she's there.
It's okay. It's okay. You have my favor. You have my peace. You can go ahead. And so she comes in, and usually her coming there would mean that she also would want something from the king. So in verse number 2, it says the king saw her, gave her a favor. He reaches out the golden scepter. She touches the golden scepter, the top of it, which is the receiving. He offers his mercy. She receives his mercy. And then in verse number 3, she says, what do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom.
Is that a saying that people would say? Because that's the same saying that they said, like when John the Baptist died, I'll give you even half the kingdom. Like,
yes.
That was just that custom, or was it because he was that smitten with her? Like, why half the kingdom? That's quite a bit of stuff.
Right.
Quite a bit.
Right. I think it's saying, I'll give you everything that you can possibly have, but you won't have more than I do. You won't be more than the queen. You will be the queen, but you will be the greatest of the queen. You won't have more than I do as the king. I think that's what it's saying. What do you think, Freddie?
It's also saying, like, go wild and whatever it is you want to ask me. Like,
Up to yeah,
that's a lot.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. But I think it's part of him giving her favor and mercy. I think he's saying to her, I want you to know you are completely under my favor. You're completely under my mercy. And it's almost as if maybe he's kind of waking up of something and kind of realizing, hey, I haven't seen her in a while. Why haven't I seen her in a while? What's going on? And I think it's connected to this, and I think it's connected to this. Okay.
Because if he had only seen her a couple days before, he might have not extended the golden scepter.
I think he would have, but I'm not sure that he would have extended it so graciously, because there's a sense of great graciousness there.
Right.
What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom. It's like whatever it is, it does, you know.
Yeah. Like you can't ask for too much.
You can't ask for too much. I am so with you. I am so connected to you. You are so my queen. And there isn't anything that I want to do at this point that wants to disconnect that. And what does she answer? She answers, if it's pleasing to the king, let the king and who?
Amen.
And Haman, the king and Haman, come to a banquet that I have prepared for them. So the king says, bring Haman quickly, and that we may do as Esther says. So the king and Haman go to the banquet Esther has prepared. And so there's a thing called the banquet of wine, and I didn't find out what that is. I don't really know what that is in verse 6. I think it's just that at the supper, the banquet she fixed for him, I think you would have had a time where you would have drank the wine and then had the food. And I'm guessing that's what that means. But anyways, in verse number 6, it's the banquet of wine. The king says to her, what?
Not too much to read.
What do you really want? Why did you really come into the court? Risk your life. Why did you really ask us here? And it shall be done up into half the kingdom. And then Esther says what?
If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question.
Okay. If, verse number 8, the beginning of verse number 8, if I've truly found your faith. He said you had your faith. He raised the golden scepter so she could live. He says, okay, we're going to come and do, you want to do this banquet? I don't know what it's about, but I want to come because you have my favor. You have my mercy. Haman's going to come too because you asked for Haman to come too. And so that's where we find ourselves, where that after the 3 days, she receives a welcome from the king. So things are going well for Esther and Mordecai as far as her life is concerned, and Mordecai is leading her. And Haman, where's Haman? Haman's right in the mix. In fact, if you look at verse number 9, Haman went out that day with what? What does it say in the NIV?
Out that day, happy and in high spirits.
Okay.
He saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence. He was filled with rage against Mordecai.
Oh, he was a sorry guy, wasn't he? He's a snake. He is a snake. He is the snake. There is a snake in the garden. There is a snake in the garden. That snake wants to purge all the Jews, not just Mordecai. We're going to take all the Jews out. And in fact, I think, let's see. He's filled with indignation, but Haman restrained himself. He went home. He called his wife. He called all of their friends together. They talk about it. He tells them about all the great things that are going on in his life. But go down to verse number 12. He says, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come with the king to the banquet. Things are really cool. And he doesn't realize that the noose is tightening on his neck, because it wasn't a positive that he was invited to that banquet.
So why do you think she made them go to like 2 banquets instead of just saying it the first time?
I don't know. Let's work on that just a little bit. Let's look and see where he gets to before the second time. Okay, so verse number 12, Queen Esther invited no one but me and the king. Verse number 13, this avails me nothing as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife says, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman. And so the gallows were made. So let's go to Genesis chapter 2 for a minute. Genesis chapter 2 for a minute. And I don't want to avoid your question. I want to entertain your question, but I want to look at a possibility of something that has been going on that God is bringing about dealing with it. Because the question or the message tonight goes around, what is the time? What is the time? And Mordecai said that he said, gosh, I can't get this to work. Mordecai said to Esther, you may have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And so the question that we're asking is, what is the time? If you look at the end of chapter 2 in Genesis, God has, you have two different accounts in chapter 1 and chapter 2 of God creating man and woman. Chapter 2 is different. There's more detail there. At the end of chapter 2, you've got Adam saying, wow, this is cool. This is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. And then the connection to probably Moses writing in that a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife and they become one flesh. Some of the theology of marriage. And then in verse 25, it says, and they were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. And I think that there's a point here that's really important because the next verse says what? Now the serpent. And verse number 25 is it's not talking even primarily about sexuality, but it's talking about the ability of men and women to be together and to be cohesive to one another and connected to one another and working with one another and loving one another. Okay, yeah, sexuality comes out of that, but it's not first off about sexuality, because it's the idea that they were not ashamed, that there wasn't anything that was breaking down their relationship. Maybe that's a better way to put it. There wasn't anything that was breaking down their relationship. But then what do you have? Chapter 3, and what does it say?
Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the other women.
Yeah, you can just stop after 3 words. Now the serpent. Because there was a serpent in the garden, and the serpent in the garden did what?
More crafty.
What did the serpent in the garden do? The serpent in the garden did what?
He messed everything up.
He messed everything up. All of the connection they had, all of the cohesiveness they had, all of the things that were right in their relationship, he broke. Okay. And here's something to think about. Remember when Esther said, I haven't been called to see the king in 30 days? This was 5 years after they had had the search and she became queen. Who rose up in that 5 years? The snake. The snake. So there was a new snake in the garden. And I think the reason that she hadn't been called in 30 days, and I think part of the reason that Xerxes is so welcoming to her is he's realizing that he's been disconnected from her
He hasn't connected.
because of Haman and because of his purge and because of the whole thing that he's doing on that. He's cool. He's just running. So I think that's the thing, and I think it's an image for us to understand that Haman had come between them. If there's anything positive going on in their lives, why would she have been away from the king for 30 days? She's still pretty young. He's still pretty young, and they've only been married for 5 years. Come on.
You know how many times the king had the queen, but he had like concubines that had other.
Right.
Was this the case with him too?
We don't know. There's a very good possibility. If you look, let's go back to Esther. We just got the little bit of Genesis we wanted to. We're not going to go any more on that. The thing we just wanted to say is that when the snake rises up in the garden in Genesis, it broke the relation, the cohesiveness and the wonder of the marriage relationship. If you look in Esther, it was the verse that Nora referred to, verse 14, chapter 2. In the evening, she would go in the morning she returned where? To the second house of women, to the custody of Ashgaz, what a name, the king's eunuch who kept who? Who kept the
What chapter? Are you
Chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 14. Let's go ahead and read it together. Yeah. So there would have been concubines. So he wouldn't have had concubines. So that's a good point to think about. That's a good point to think about. But if God has put this new queen in King Xerxes' life, and if she is a strong influence and someone who is an influencer in the king's life, then what is the snake going to want to do? You want to break that up. He's going to break that up because you got a snake in the garden. So the first question that we is asking and looking at the title for tonight, what is the time? Is it time for the snake to rise and win a great victory? Because that's what's happened over this 5-year period. My guess is that the snake arose because this you had 480. He was in Greece. He was there for a while. He comes back at 478. He's got a new king or a new queen. But after that new queen comes, he's not thinking about going back to Greece. He was defeated in Greece. There wasn't, for whatever reason, there wasn't maybe the support or whatever, trying to go back there. But you got this guy that gets raised up in Haman. But Haman has his own agenda. And I think that a significant part of that agenda is the influence that the new queen had on him, and that he wanted to break that down. And I think that's part of it. And I think the concubines is a good suggestion too, Freddie, because it could have been that Haman would have said, just, don't bring the queen in, just, have the concubines there. Just have the concubines there. Because what that does, it continues to cut down the influence of the queen. And so the first question is, what is the time? Is it the time for the snake to rise up and win a great victory? The snake, Haman, thinks so. And when he goes home, he's going, oh man, things are so good for me. Things are so good for me. Queen Esther and the king and I went to and had a banquet, and Queen Esther invited just me and the king to a banquet tomorrow. But it's so bad because Mordecai is here, and I've got to get rid of Mordecai. I've got to start this purge. Is it time for the snake to rise up and win a great victory? Question, what is the time? Or is it time for Esther to rise up and carry out God's will and to defeat the snake and all of the things that the snake is doing to save the Jews? And not only part of I think this is saving the Jews, but I think it's to rescue her husband from Haman. Because I think Haman, you look, there's one little passage in chapter 3, and they have written up at the very end of chapter 3, the couriers are going out. They've decided what day they're going to do the purge. The couriers are going out. They're hastened, verse 15. They're hastened by the king's command. The decree was proclaimed in Shushan, the citadel. And what happened? The end of chapter 15. Verse 15. Yeah.
Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. Is that what you're
Chapter 3.
Sorry.
That's okay. Chapter 3. Let's go again. Chapter 3, verse 15. We're just
spurred on by the king's command, the couriers went out. The edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered.
Why wasn't the queen there? Why wasn't anybody else there? Because he is setting it up so that he is the influencer on the king's life, that he is the one that's in charge of his life. And so we've got that and so then, it wasn't just about saving the Jewish people, though that was a major part of it, probably as significant as anything else, but it was also rescuing her husband and her marriage so that she could continue to be an influence, because unless she had done that, she wasn't going to be able to save the Jewish people, because those things were connected. And in God's will, it was for the will of the serpent to be put down. So what time is it? Time to put the serpent down. It was time for Esther to rise up. Now, what was your question that you asked a bit ago?
The first was, I think it was, why do you think she had 2 banquets
instead of just doing it?
But it could have been because kind of like one of those stories where it comes back to bite you, because he built the gallows,
Yeah. I think the reason that she had 2 banquets, you look at the first thing, why didn't she ask Xerxes when she first came in?
Right.
Why didn't she say, Xerxes, this is what's going on? I think that God had to open up Xerxes' eyes because Xerxes had the coils of the snake work and he wasn't seeing clearly. If he was seeing clearly, it would have been 30 days where Esther wasn't there. If you have a godly woman in your life who is a beautiful woman, you're going to keep her out of your life for 30 days. She's saying to Mordecai, I can't go in and I haven't been called in 30 days. Why? The snake.
So she needed time to soften him up.
She needed time for his eyes to be open to
Right.
see what was really happening.
Because he had been now so hardened by him.
Haman had the great influence on his life. Look at the time frame. Okay, here's when Esther and the king get together. 5 years later, Haman doing the purge. He's getting the purge together. He has worked hard. It talks about in the book about how that the king has raised him above everybody else, and he's so inflated in his own mind and his connection to the king, and that the king's power is basically his power. The king has given him the signet ring. And when there's one little guy that doesn't stand up and say, you're the best thing since sliced bread, he is irritated like, I'll get out. So I think that's the answer to that. So that makes the most sense to me in the situation. And we'll look at it again. I don't want to do the second banquet yet because I want to give it a little bit of time and what happens in between in chapter 6, how that God is still cutting loose Haman from Xerxes, because Haman has seriously, and I think it is emphasized by this. And you look at this time frame, and you're going, Haman spent 5 years setting himself up to be basically the king in waiting, and he could do everything the king wanted him to do. He sure could when he got the signet ring, I think so. All right. Anything else for tonight?
Did you ever watch the VeggieTales Esther?
That's one I haven't seen. I had seen the VeggieTales Jonah. Is the VeggieTales Esther good?
Yeah, it's good, but all I can think of every time we talk about Haman is the little gourd